So welcome everyone to our Talks on Tuesday webinar. These are monthly webinars brought to you by the Virginia Early Intervention Professional Development Center. My name is Lisa Terry. I'm an early intervention professional development consultant at VEIPD, and I will be helping to facilitate today and providing some backup support. We also have Lorelei from our team here providing some backup support as necessary. So if you need anything or have any tech issues, feel free to send me or Lorelei a message in the chat. But we are so excited to bring this topic. Jen and Lauren are very passionate about it and sharing this information. So we are going to really break down autism and neurodiversity, supporting children and families through a neurodiversity-affirming approach. And this is part 1 of part 2 series. So next month, we will have the part 2 session. And if you are registered for today's session, you are already automatically registered for the second session. So no need to register again. We will be using the stamp feature today, and we'll give you directions as that comes up, as well as the poll. And then you can feel free to utilize the chat throughout today's session. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Lauren and Jen.
Thanks, Lisa. My name is Jen Saddington. I am a physical therapist. I've worked in early intervention in Northern Virginia for my whole career, and right now I work for the Infant Toddler Connection of Fairfax and Falls Church. I provide ongoing PT services. I also serve on eligibility and ASP teams, and I'm part of our assistive technology team, which helps manage our kind of AT-AAC loan closet. I'm here today though because I love neurodiversity. I am a parent to an autistic child who has some low support needs, and that the kind of neurodiversity affirming practices and language have really kind of transformed my parenting and our family. I'm also really excited to be here today presenting with Lauren, because Lauren and I have been friends for 25 years. She's always been my go-to person to brainstorm about supports for my kids. And we spend a lot of our personal time together talking about neurodiversity and what that means for our lives and our work. So we're really excited to be here today to do that during our workday. So I'll let Lauren introduce herself some more.
Yes, I agree. It's such a privilege to be here with Jen because we do spend a lot of time talking about this anyway. So I am currently a developmental specialist and serve as dual role as a service coordinator with Arlington Pi. And so I do ASPs, ongoing developmental services, and also carry a small caseload of service coordination only children. I study special education and previously taught ages 8 to 11 at a special education charter school. And I am neurodivergent, and ADHD and autism are really common in my immediate and extended family. So it's something that has been part of a discussion my entire life.
Today, we're going to talk about a lot of different of the Division of Early Childhood recommended practices, but 2 that we picked out specifically was the family 4. Practitioners and the family will work together to create outcomes, goals, develop individualized plans, and implement practices that address the family's priorities and concerns and the child's strengths and needs. And also the family 5, that practitioners will support family functioning, promote family confidence and competence, and strengthen the family-child relationships by acting in ways that recognize and build on family strengths and capacities. We're going to go ahead and use the stamp feature here because we'd love to know where everybody is from. And so you're going to kind of place a stamp in the region of Virginia where you currently provide early intervention services. If you're not from Virginia, feel free to stamp kind of in the direction in that white area of where you're from.
And in order to access your stamp feature, you're going to go to the top of your screen where it says you are viewing Lauren's monitors, her screen. So you want to click View Options, and then you will click Annotate. And then from there, you'll see like a little check mark where you can choose a stamp feature, and feel free to choose a heart, star, whichever one that you like.
And we would love if you could put your name or job title in the chat.
And once you are finished stamping, make sure you hit that red X, or else we'll just keep getting stamps all over the place.
We have people from all over. joining us. And we were talking before about the weather and the kind of, rainy versus beautiful weather that we're having around the state today.
And it looks like we have a lot of different representation of people doing a variety of different jobs within early intervention. So we're going to exit our stamps.
As we're starting, we wanted to talk about some of the things that we're going to be doing specifically today in our presentation. The first is that we're going to be using that identity first language. A lot of us in school or in our professional careers starting out probably learned about person first language. And the identity first language is a way that emphasizes that kind of the disability is playing a role in who the person is. And it reinforces that kind of that complex disability in a marginalized community that is a cultural identifier, and they might need more support rather than something like a mental pathology. We use identity first language with the autistic communities because that's generally been preferred by the self-advocates in the autistic communities. We also see that commonly in the deaf and blind communities as well. And to go along with that, we will be capitalizing autistic and autism and not referring to autism as ASD or autism spectrum disorder. And we want to recognize that the most important thing in our personal and professional lives is to be using the terminology that the family and the child prefers. And so if a family or a child, prefers person first language, then that is what we're going to be using. And in EI, we can begin to have these conversations as teams discussing the language that you use when you're talking with families, what providers want to be using, and kind of continuing to monitor what current information is saying. Like, we know that things kind of keep changing, and that right now that is what we're hearing from autistic self-advocates. We have a poll here about how familiar are you with neurodiversity. I have never heard the term. I've heard the term and I'm still learning what it means. I'm familiar with the term and meaning, and I'm very familiar with the term and have engaged in learning around it. And in the chat, you can share some words that you associate with the term neurodiversity while we're collecting those responses.
And just as a reminder, go ahead and make sure you hit that red X out of your annotation stamp toolbar.
We saw, yeah, a word from inclusive for neurodiversity. That's a great term. You can see here that we have a variety of experience with the term. We're going to kind of start from the beginning. So if you've never heard the term, hopefully you'll be able to leave here with a little bit more information. And we're going to kind of continue building on that after we discuss kind of some of those basics today, and then in our April talks on Tuesday as well. Some other great words in the chat are, range, respect, the different way of thinking, equitable, capable. So the question is kind of, what is neurodiversity? And neurodiversity, means neuro-brain diversity, some differences, similar to kind of biodiversity, bio where we're looking at kind of living things, and diversity, the differences and variety of kind of life here on Earth, plants, animals, microorganisms, everything is kind of needed to be able to support life. We know with neurodiversity that individuals have different brain functionings, and it's a normal variation within our human population. And you can see here the definition from Merriam-Webster. The part that we really like is that brain functioning that's not neurotypical should not be stigmatized. We know that everybody's brains are different. We have a series of little illustrations here by a neurodivergent adult who makes a lot of nice visuals for talking with kind of children and families about neurodiversity and the neurodivergent experience. Their name is NeuroWild. You can find them on like Instagram or Facebook. So this is going to look at kind of neurotypical. That's the brains that we're mostly used to. And then any brain that's not neurotypical would be neurodivergent. It's that kind of normal variation. It could include diagnoses like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia. And you'll see kind of the ND cupcakes down there are some of those neurodivergent cupcakes. There are many different types of neurodivergent brains, and often people have a mix of more than one neurotype. This is just, a small sampling of things that fall under that neurodivergent umbrella. We know that they can, that autism co-occurred with a lot of other disabilities, intellectual disability, Down syndrome, Angelman's, and that around 30% of autistic people also have an intellectual disability. And that research tells us that those with co-occurring disabilities often have higher support needs than those without other co-occurring disabilities. We use the term neurodiverse when we're talking about a group. So this group of cupcakes here is neurodiverse, which means that there's more than one type of brain. You'll see there's a neurotypical brain there, and then there's a variety of different neurodivergent brain cupcakes there. When a group has all the same neurotype, in this case, autism, it's not neurodiverse. So you need to have, we assume that our group here today is neurodiverse. We have individuals who are identified as neurodivergent and those who have neurotypical brains. If you have any kind of questions about any of the kind of terminology, feel free to put them in the chat and we can kind of make sure to answer that.
So we're just going to go over the neurodiversity movement, which we're talking about as separate from the term neurodiversity. And this was really founded in the 90s in response to autism advocacy at the time. So resources at the time were often put into finding a cure, and therapies were focused on establishing how to teach children neurotypical behaviors, and the view of autism was bad and negative things, something to be fixed. And a really defining point in this, in specifically autistic self-advocacy, was an essay called "Don't Mourn for Us," and it's reflective of the start of the movement. I'm going to read a sample from it in a little bit. And the Autism Network International was started in 1992, and that marked the beginning of autistic cultural spaces and organizations for autistic self-advocacy. Now more resources are put into early supports, autistic people and their families, listening to lived experiences, and shifting towards this idea of autism neutrality, which is autism just is. Autism is neither good nor bad. It's a reality as part of all the neurodiversity that we live with. And as you can see, this first symbol here is the original symbol for Autism Speaks back in the 90s. And this symbol here, the infinity symbol that's a rainbow, is the current symbol for like neurodiversity or autistic pride. You'll also maybe see a gold infinity symbol, and that is because gold on the periodic table is AU, and it's something that has value. Just in the chat, what do you notice about the difference between these two symbols? What different feelings do they evoke? The new one feels happier. Yeah, darker versus lighter. The coloring difference is like drab versus optimistic. Yeah, just looking at the symbol makes you feel something more positive. And colors are happy. I like that one. Infinite possibilities, yeah. And joyful. Okay.
And I like, someone said that the piece, the first one looks like it's not whole.
It's missing a piece. Yeah, continuum instead of a piece missing. I really liked this visual. It's from an autistic artist, and it's called The Mind of an Autistic. And it really goes along with Jim Sinclair's Don't Mourn for Us piece. And this is just a snippet from that. It's autism is a way of being. It is pervasive. It colors every experience, every sensation, perception, thought, emotion, and encounter, every aspect of existence. It is not possible to separate the autism from the person. And if it were possible, the person you'd have left would not be the same person you started with. And so that piece was considered to be a defining moment in the beginning of the neurodiversity movement. And although it was written in 1993, this could be considered a pretty controversial statement today. And it contradicts with what many of us were taught, because it moves away from that person first. It moves away from the idea of curing autism as a piece of somebody.
Now that we know a little bit about neurodiversity affirming is probably a term that you've kind of been hearing more recently. And the idea of neurodiversity, to be neurodiversity affirming, is acknowledging that all neurotypes, even those who differ from the norm, are equal in value and valid in their right to exist. This means that we value an individual's strengths and accommodate their challenges. It also means that we accept differences in communication, social interaction, behavior, and learning. The neurodiversity approach really highlights the role that the environment and societal barriers kind of exacerbate those challenges faced by neurodivergent individuals. And it's also just a philosophy that can impact both your personal and your professional life. We recognize that, this is a change for a lot of us, and that it's not an immediate change, and that it kind of requires that constant work and growth and looking into resources and kind of keeping up with what people who are actually autistic are saying. We're going to have some terminology kind of review here. Please put any questions in the chat so that we can kind of clarify before we move forward. The neurodiversity model is that idea that there's a natural diversity of human brains and that they're all a little bit different. The neurodiversity movement is what Lauren was talking about, that started with Jim Sinclair's essay. It's that social justice movement. And the neurodiversity affirming is an approach that acknowledges that all the neurotypes have unique strengths, interests, and support needs. So really kind of the overall idea that, neurodiversity is neurodivergent brains are not inherently inferior or worse or inherently better than kind of neurotypical brains, and everybody's brains are just what they are. So then neurodivergent is a person whose brain differs from a statistical norm. Neurotypical is a person whose brain does not differ from the statistical norm. And then neurodiverse would be the term for a group of people with different types of brains. I think sometimes we'll see someone talk about, like my child is neurodiverse. A child cannot be neurodiverse, they would be neurodivergent. Your family might be neurodiverse if there's people with different types of brains in it.
Any questions about terminology before we continue? Because we're going to continue to use a lot of these terms throughout our next presentation as well.
So when we're thinking about that neurodiversity affirming approach that acknowledges that all those neurotypes have unique strengths, interests, and support needs, go ahead and take out your stamps again and stamp the neurodiversity affirming statement. So these might be things that, we've said in our assessments or with families, maybe even things that families have said about their children.
And to access your stamp again, you want to go to View Options at the top of your screen and click Annotate. And then you'll see an option for stamp, and you can choose which one you want. And again, just make sure as soon as you are finished, you hit that red X to exit the toolbar.
Yep, yeah, I see you guys are kind of stamping the two that Lauren and I were thinking about as neurodiversity affirming. So Brady benefits from visual supports during transitions at preschool. A way that maybe would not be neurodiversity affirming, is that like Brady can't transition between, music and PE classes, or, Brady has a tantrum and, always wants to hit the teacher. But looking at kind of what it is that maybe is helpful really gives us more information about a child in a way that's affirming. And then Nate prefers independent play, especially sorting his plastic dinosaurs by color. So it's just a neutral statement. It's not saying that it's worse that he prefers independent play than play with people. It's just stating kind of the facts of how he plays. The other two statements, Sean has restricted interest and only wants to talk about letters and numbers. The term restricted is a little bit, more judgmental than saying just like what someone prefers. So you might say, Sean, loves to talk about letters and numbers, or is really passionate about letters and numbers, or knows a lot about letters and numbers. And then Beth refuses to look her mom in the eye when asking for a snack. We know from autistic individuals that eye contact sometimes is painful, or, makes it harder for them to be communicating. And that we know that autistic individuals can communicate without looking at people. They can have joint attention and all of those things. So maybe the more neurodiversity affirming statement would be, Beth grabs her mom's hand when she asks for, to ask for a snack, or, Beth goes to the snack pantry to ask for a snack.
And then before we move on, we're going to want to make sure to exit out of your stamps. Perfect.
One of the reasons that Lauren and I are really passionate about neurodiversity and neurodiversity affirming practices is thinking about the really positive potential of neurodiversity affirming language and neurodiversity affirming supports for the children and families that we work with in early intervention. That we, as early intervention providers, can impact how parents view autism and disability in general. We know that society in general doesn't, place as much value on individuals who are disabled or who are autistic. And so a lot of times when we're talking to families about things like autism or disability, they already have that, preconceived notion from their culture, our culture, what people in their lives have talked about. And so as we are talking with them in a more neutral or affirming way and helping them see those strengths of their children, it can really start to change that parent's view on that, which helps with their understanding and acceptance. Because we know that, autism and other disabilities are going to change how they continue to impact children, but that they're going to continue to be part of this family's story. And that the way that we can help parents kind of become understanding and accept their child is going to be really important in their parenting. The other thing, kind of when we're thinking about neurodiversity and neurodiversity affirming approaches, is that we want to make sure that, in the future that children are having that information about their disability, because then we're able to better discuss their strengths and the challenges that they might face. This likely isn't happening with kids that we're seeing in early intervention due to their age. It might be happening with the siblings of the children we're working with, but that we're in the future, that's something that, is going to probably be a discussion that the family is having. And that as we're having those neurodiversity affirming conversations with families, it might be able to impact that future conversations with their family. And ultimately, that could help the children have those future feelings of self-worth and help build those opportunities for self-advocacy. Autistic children become autistic adults. We know from statistics, things like autistic children and adults have a greater risk of self-harm and suicide than their neurotypical peers, and that autistic women experience sexual violence at 2 to 3 times the rate of their neurotypical peers. And so having people understand those statistics and helping support that individual's right to bodily autonomy is another way that we can really help. Kind of the work that we're doing with kind of these little language changes can help this down the line with these families. And so I think Lauren and I really like to think about, families we're working with that we're really only a very small part of their, journey with autism, but what we can be doing kind of to build that foundation is going to be really important and valuable for families and their children going forward. I said at the beginning that neurodiversity affirming, supports and language is something that's really important to me and my family. One of my kids is autistic. He has low support needs, and he's a kid who's really shy. So we continue to work on his self-advocacy, and we have been working on kind of recognizing the things his brain needs and his brain's strengths. We talk a lot about the brains in our house, talk about each other's brains, kids at school's brains, and what their strengths are and kind of what they might still be working on. And so my son and I made this video when he was 6 for a presentation that we were doing for a neurodiversity ministry at our church. So you'll hear me at the beginning ask about like talking to people at church. Since then, he's let me share this video with more people. You'll see and hear that this is another visual from NeuroWild, the neurodivergent adult who makes those comics. And he and I kind of looked at a variety of these comics and talked about which ones really resonated with me. So in this picture, you'll see kind of that top green brain has NT for neurotypical. Are you unbothered by sounds, smells, lights, and the feel of things in your body? And then there's some other examples in this purple side. Or do you find that noises are often too loud, smells are often too strong, and haircuts and sunscreen are unbearable? And those are all things that, my son really, really agreed with. We showed just a very short clip of this kind of 6-minute video of us talking together. But my favorite part of the video was at the end when I asked him if he had any other thoughts about his brain. And he said, I love my brain 100%. And that's, what our family really strives for, for him just to have love and acceptance for all of his strengths. And that's the hope that, we have for the families that we work with, that they can get to a place where they can be raising their kids to really appreciate those differences, being able to look for those supports, recognizing that there are a lot of things that might be difficult for them, but still really loving themselves and loving their children and families. So here's going to be our video.
Tell me something interesting recently about eyes. And when you were thinking about things and looking at eyes, can you tell me, everyone at church, about that?
I don't like looking at the eyes.
Why not?
Because then the ideas get out of my head.
Oh, so when you look at someone's eyes, the ideas get out of your head?
Yeah.
And what happens if you then look away again?
Then they go back in.
Then they go back in. Is it okay to not have to look at people at the eyes? Yeah. Because what are you really good at with using your ears for? Listening. Yeah, you don't have to be looking at someone to be listening, do you?
Yeah.
I was remembering how you like to listen to things, and do you love to read things?
Mhm.
And do you remember everything that you read?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And so you can see there that he came up with that idea totally by himself, telling me that like the reason I don't like to look at people is because the ideas go out of my head. When he first told me, he was telling me that he had lots of ideas about like Lego mechs that he was going to build, and then when he looks at people, all those ideas go out of his head, and then when he comes back in, he can kind of looks away, he could focus on what they were talking with him about. The video is just of the kind of the picture that says like, or maybe. He is not someone who loves to be in front of the camera. And so this was kind of our compromise for him to be able to share the things that he really loves about his brain and the things that are harder for his brain without, being on video and having that pressure.
Tell me something interesting recently.
So one thing, if you have been, oh, I agree with Stephanie. I love how he articulates how he feels. It makes me happy every time I watch that video, and I've seen it many times. So if you've been having conversations or looking at information about the neurodiversity movement, you know that there have been a lot of critiques of the movement. And so we want to address those today. And one thing to think about first is, like all ideas that grow in public discourse and awareness, terminology can change in meeting with greater time and distance from its initial inception. So in an article, Neurodiversity is Politics, the authors referred to the current debate as a game of telephone. That one idea gets passed to someone else, gets passed to someone else. And so meanings change in different groups of people. I would say Jen and I are really flexible and nuanced in our view of what it means to be neurodiversity affirming. There is very little that is a hard line drawn in the sand. And this might be different from previous discussions or information that you've read. So one of the first things we're going to talk about is the neurodiversity movement and the idea of disability. And so one critique is that this dismisses the very real challenges that autistic people and their families face every day. You might hear things like autism is my superpower, or other sayings that minimize the challenges faced by autistic people with high support needs in their families. And another critique is that the term removes that ability to identify a functioning level of each autistic person. We typically will talk about support needs. You've heard us refer to that several times now, over the traditional conversation around low functioning, high functioning. And so our response to that is embracing differences does not inherently dismiss disability. We've heard us talk about disability multiple times so far. Neurodiversity affirming and the neurodiversity movement really focuses on recognizing strengths, but acknowledging challenges that do require supports. So we use that terminology, support needs. And that allows for more specific information about which areas a person needs support in. Now, it is a valid critique that we need more spaces to hear from people with high support needs and their family and their families. When we talk, we're talking about disability with neutrality. It allows for more open dialogue about strengths and support needs. And when we say neutrality, we're not meeting without empathy. Being neurodiversity affirming includes acknowledging the real challenges autistic people face in the world. And with the idea of functioning, people may need different support needs in different places and at different times in their lives. And so support allows for more specific information to be shared. And Jen's going to talk a little bit more about that with you.
Another graphic that we really love. A lot of times when we're thinking of, the autism spectrum, people might think it's kind of linear, like this person is less autistic, this person is really autistic, terms like high functioning and low functioning. But really the autism spectrum is more like a wheel. Every person that you meet is different. Every situation might, an individual who is autistic might look different in different situations. If you look up the autism wheel, there's lots of different kind of labels of what these different colors might look like. This one has things like social differences. So when we're looking at that little pie chart on the right, that, that person might have a lot of social differences. We're looking at their interests, like maybe they don't have a lot of interests that we would say would be different than other, people their age. They might have some things that are repetitive, but not a lot of repetitive behaviors, more sensory sensitivity. So you can kind of use this to show where a child might be different. Something that I really find so interesting, like our family has several autistic friends who also have lower support needs like my son. And if we did wheels on all of them, we'd see very different strengths and needs for all of those individuals, even though they're around the same age with the same diagnosis. Needs might really change. My kiddo has a lot of kind of social differences and anxiety in situations that are loud or overwhelming. But when he's at home or with people he knows, he's very social. He really wants to, be with people. And so when you're seeing individuals in different settings, like we might in EI, you might see, different places they have support needs to be able to then, help families figure out how to articulate, when I go to a community class, I have a lot of, high support needs, and this is what benefits me. And, at home, I have less support needs because I'm able to do all of these things differently.
And so another critique we often hear is about representation. And that the neurodiversity movement is not very inclusive of individuals with very high support needs and their families. That the movement is really only representing autistic people who can advocate for themselves. And there's often strong, inflexible stances against behavioral therapies and interventions. And those don't really acknowledge the realities of the environments autistic people are in every day, especially those who belong to other oppressed groups. And this is where things are nuanced. The philosophy behind this movement is inclusive of individuals of all support needs. And there need to be more spaces for autistic people and their families that are inclusive of all support needs. So depending on the environment and the individuals involved, this is a really valid critique. And there are more conversations within this community about how to move towards being more inclusive of everybody. Being neurodiversity affirming means wanting to provide more supports and resources for autistic people and for all autistic people. And there are currently more conversation happening with AAC users with medium or high support needs. And part of the bigger discussion is really supporting children at a very young age, toddlers we see, to access appropriate, robust AAC and communication really early, because we know that when they access it early, it improves their ability to communicate throughout their life, and it allows people to continue to participate in these conversations of all support need levels. Another critique that we often see has to do with identity politics. I know I've heard this a lot, that in general, binaries are viewed as a very negative thing. This idea of neurodivergent and neurotypical, or you might hear the term autistic and allistic, meaning someone who does not have autism, and that these are devices. And it creates an environment where the term neurotypical or allistic is seen as a pejorative, and that it might alienate allies to the autistic community and might undermine advocacy efforts. And we would say that providing individuals with knowledge about their disability and understanding of their own strengths and challenges is powerful. Labels can be really powerful and affirming. And we know that autistic individuals deal with labels placed on them by the medical community, having to do with their diagnosis anyway. So there are already labels in place. It is up to each individual and their family to determine how they refer to their disability and whether or not they feel they are disabled and their unique strengths and challenges. So I challenge you guys to think about that movement to intellectual disability rather than the R word, or choosing the term capital D deaf rather than with deafness. Those are both disability and social justice movements that led to big changes in how we talk about those specific disabilities. And so the neurodiversity movement is really aiming to have those conversations. Another critique has to do with race, and that it is a really privileged approach to talk about not teaching children neurotypical traits, that teaching children to mask or suppress specific neurodivergent traits and behaviors can increase their safety out in their environments and in the world. And that's true. We do not live in a neurodiversity affirming world. And so when we talk about being neurodiversity affirming, we are talking about, as professionals, holding viewpoints that are neurodiversity affirming, holding that philosophy. We're talking about trying to create spaces that are neurodiversity affirming. We're talking about advocating for change, having open conversations with families about fears, and really acknowledging family priorities and addressing them when it's appropriate. And being humble and having humility about situations that you may or may not understand or have the lived experience to talk about. So we're going to have a poll right now to talk about how familiar you are with the term ableism. And we're going to get into this in a few minutes to talk about this term and what it really means when compared to neurodiversity when we talk about autism. it seems like we have kind of right. So we have people who represent each one of these. We have people who believe, who said this term is new to me, but they've heard it once or twice, that they've heard it many times, but not really familiar with what it means. People that are familiar with the term, and a few people who are very familiar with this term. And so just like a lot of other isms, ableism either subtly or directly portrays individuals who are being defined by their disabilities as inherently inferior to non-disabled people. So it's that inferiority or one group being better than another group that we relate to terms that are isms, and ableism is no different from that. And ableism greatly impacts the lives and mental health of the children and caregivers that we see in early intervention and then throughout their lives. And ableism can be as small as a microaggression, such as "that is so OCD," or "you don't look autistic," or "you don't look disabled," referencing a disability if you do not have it. And then something you might also see are news articles or videos. Oh, I see "idiot," "dumb" as slurs, yes. You might see news articles or videos centering a caregiver or a parent in their experience over an autistic person or a disabled person and their experience. And it's really looking at a piece of news or information and saying, like, is this giving me information to learn about an autistic experience or lived experience? Or is this here to make me feel better and provide me with inspiration? And that's a really good question as you look at articles and information. And I know in this field, we receive a lot of these. I know they're been sent to me throughout my career by family members when they see information. So sharing this with people, saying, I would love to send you more information about autistic people that's written by autistic people. The neurodiversity movement focuses on acceptance and is a very different view of autism. To be neurodiversity affirming means to be constantly evaluating information as well as your internal beliefs for signs of ableism. This is something, I will find myself using things like, "oh, an idiot," "that's really weird." Thinking about, like, are these things that are referencing someone else's disability or assumptions of intelligence? And something else to think about is there are people who have co-opted the neurodiversity paradigm and movement in a way that often raises the voices of people with lower support needs and diminishes and dismisses the voices of those with higher support needs and their families. And that's something called lateral ableism. It's ableism within a community. And as you're consuming information about neurodiversity, it's really important to be discerning about the information you read. Thinking about who wrote the piece. Does it appear to reflect multiple viewpoints? To really think about, is this representative of the autistic community as a whole or the neurodiversity community as a whole? And if it's not, where can I look for information that might be more inclusive? Or thinking about and reflecting about what that experience might be like for someone with higher support needs.
Another thing that we consider, is neurodiversity and intersectionality. And so intersectionality is the idea that you might have lots of things that are all converging. You might not just be autistic, you might be autistic and Black, you might be autistic and transgender, you might be autistic and low income. And so some of the kind of ones that we see most commonly kind of referenced in the neurodiversity literature is that compared to cisgender individuals, transgender and gender diverse individuals have on average higher rates of autism or other neurodevelopmental and psychiatric diagnoses. And then according to the CDC, that reports have consistently noted that more white children are identified as autistic than Black or Hispanic children. And that there's been a lot of studies on that second point, and that, studies have shown a wide variety of things like stigma in communities, lack of access to healthcare services due to, income, citizenship, the ability to take off work to be able to take your child to multiple appointments, have the transportation to get there, non-English primary language is a potential barrier, thoughts about a kind of like what your culture has previously maybe experienced in the past with either you or kind of people with your similar cultural backgrounds or your family might have experienced before with their interactions with the healthcare system, if it has been, there's been a lot of bias or a lot of like racism or, people not believing you, then you might be less likely to be, accessing any kind of services or any kind of medical, diagnosis than, white families. And so something to kind of be thinking about as you're working with a wide variety of families, that how can we be kind of understanding where they are and kind of helping be maybe positive, affirming members of the, medical and educational communities to help, think about what is it that's really most important for this family and how can we help them, feel good about what they are doing to be supporting their child. Our next webinar in April is going to focus more on that, how to be neurodiversity affirming in our practices in early intervention. Like, what do we do in each step of our process? Some examples of how you can be neurodiversity affirming. This is that same neurodiversity infinity symbol. Some of those key parts of that neurodiversity affirming practice that we'd love to challenge you to think about this next month in your work and how you maybe are already doing things, how you would like some ideas about how to do this some more, and bringing those to our next presentation in April would be, presuming competence so that, if a child is non-speaking, that doesn't mean that they're not understanding. If they're not maybe showing you things, like what are other ways that we can be assessing things that might be not exactly how our tools are looking, helping promote autonomy and what that looks like for each child and family, respecting all communication styles, being informed by those neurodivergent voices, and really seeking out, like Lauren was talking about, representation of a lot of different types of neurodivergent voices, people from lots of different races, people of different income levels, people with different amounts of support needs, to really get a more full picture of kind of strengths and challenges of families and children. I think in early intervention, we already, understand and are really trying to do that strengths-based approach, that we really value the things a child already is doing. And I think that we are already thinking about how are we helping families see those strengths. Some of that, language around that, we can continue to kind of make sure that it's really neurodiversity affirming, honoring neurodivergent culture, not maybe changing those norms or behaviors, and then tailoring supports to individual needs. And so not, every child who's autistic might not need the same supports. I think that we also do that in early intervention. We maybe don't recommend, speech or OT or education for, specifically for one child, that we're looking at what is it that this child and family need right now and what might be the best supports for that child. And that might, helping families see how that might change as children age, as they're, entering the school system, and helping them see what that looks like kind of in their life. I think we have questions, some space for questions. Oh, well, actually, first we're going to share some takeaways and any questions that you have in the chat or any thoughts you have about neurodiversity, questions and things we didn't talk about. I know that we had a good question during our practice about whether individuals, especially like adults, could self-diagnose kind of autism in themselves, which has kind of been something that has been more in the kind of news and social media. And I think that our discussion then was that, that is a valid way that, individuals who are adults might be getting autism diagnoses.
And it's possible in your practice that you may meet a parent who is recognizing themselves in the things that we're talking about in their child. And we know there is a genetic component to autism. And so you may find parents that are really reflecting about autism in themselves as they're looking at the information you're sharing about their child and what they learn about their child in medical appointments.
Maybe looking at the infinity symbol, the spectrum wheel. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to either unmute and ask or type anything in the chat that you've thought of.
Yeah, high-low support needs versus high-low functioning, and thinking about talking about high and low support needs as even more specific than that. Needing high support needs in specific environments or higher support needs in specific areas. You have a simple past to present, yes.
Will the next one show setting some neuro-affirming goals on IFSPs?
Yes.
Great.
We are going to go through kind of each stage in the early intervention process and ways that we can really practically be neurodiversity affirming.
That sounds awesome. Thank you.
And Lauren, you might know more than I, but the question of, do we have a compiled list of support groups for family of neurodivergent children? It's been a reoccurring question that I haven't found many resources to. I know we have many systems here, but a list could be helpful.
That's a really good question. I know that there have been a lot of conversations around that. And I will look into it a little bit more. I think some of the challenges are location, but I think we have enough conversations around the state. The specific conversation around neurodiversity affirming support groups versus autism support groups in general is a little difficult to identify externally. You have to be participating in those conversations to really know what that looks like. And so that is a little bit more challenging for people who are not in those specific groups of having a child who is neurodivergent to be able to participate in. So if anyone knows of any, please share them.
There's another question. With that earlier we mentioned autism, not ASD. Is ASD considered not neurodiversity affirming?
And we would say, as we define neurodiversity affirming, the term disorder or disordered would not be considered neurodiversity affirming. It is part of the diagnostic label and the diagnostic criteria. So a child may have ASD written down on paperwork, but as we're talking about autism, we're talking about autism or the autism spectrum. Autism spectrum differences. I mean, we love the word difference. I would say that the challenge is that not everyone knows that D would mean differences versus disorder.
Yeah, I think that what kind of the system I work in has shifted to doing when we're talking about those families is just saying autism, since we're not making any diagnoses specifically, and that kind of wait lists for diagnoses are so long anyways that, that we're just mentioning autism and not kind of saying anything after, autism period.
Oh, Sandy.
She mentioned you.
Oh yeah, I will, if anyone directs message, I will either message you separately, or if you are okay with this being a conversation in the main group, let me know.
Yeah, and I think Lisa put in the chat our handout, and on there we found some, resources that we both like, web resources, podcasts, books, and then some children's books. Yeah, we read a lot of books and, children's books in my house, and we just do a lot of talking, if my kids come home and they're like, oh, Lauren was running around the classroom today. Like, oh, it sounds like Lauren's brain really likes to move. What other good, what else does Lauren's brain love to do that's maybe like yours, or that, is maybe kind of reframing it into another way that might be, more positive, instead of, just hearing about things that kids might be having trouble with.
I especially love, you'll see on here, A Day with No Words. It is a beautiful book about a parent choosing to use AAC for a day with their child. And then My Brain is a Race Car is a really great example to talk about children, about even siblings, about how fast your brain moves and how many things are going on in your brain. Specifically under books, I highly recommend Uniquely Human, specifically the updated version. It is a great way to explore language we can use when talking to families, because it's written in a very neurodiversity affirming space. Okay, Sandy shared that it would be okay if I shared this here. She talked about the fact that, is it possible for people to use ableism on themselves, or older children or siblings to use ableism on themselves. And that's referred to as internalized ableism. So if that's something you're interested in looking more into, that would be the term that you would look up.
If you have any other questions, feel free to continue to type them into the chat for Lauren and Jen. But I want to give you just some last minute things. So if you can go to the next slide, just so you know, if you registered again today for the Talks on Tuesday, part 2 is going to be on April 2nd from 12 to 1 p.m. You are already registered for that. And then on the next slide, it will show you the directions for the survey, if we can move there. And so you should have in your inbox right now a link to the survey. Once you take the survey, you can download the certificate that'll automatically populate at the end of that. Make sure that you save that for your records, because we don't hold those. So make sure that you save that certificate so you have that in case you need it for the future. But huge thank you to Lauren and Jen. I'm really excited about listening to part 2 and really diving into some of those practical strategies in the early intervention process, but you both really did a phenomenal job just laying the foundation for us today. So thank you so much. And you had so many thank yous and kudos in the chat, and you'll see that they are just still rolling in. So thank you both so much for doing this for us today.
Thank you all for coming and being interested in neurodiversity affirming language and practices in our field.
We look forward to seeing everyone next time as well.
Have a great day. Thank you.